As many of you already know, I've been covering PlayStation news here on this channel for nearly 8 years now, or I think a little bit longer than that actually. But we've been following PS5 from the very beginning up to this point. And so now it's time to do the one video that has been highly requested since I did this for PS3 and PS4, and that's PS5 leaks and rumors. How much of everything that we've gone over for the 2+ years we've been following this platform, how much of all that was actually true? Let's find out. Starting off, some of the earliest PS5 rumors we have go back to March and April of 2018. In March, Marcus Sellers tweeted out that PS5 dev kits were sent out to third-party developers. The following month, however, we saw a more noteworthy rumor where it was initially reported from Semi-Accurate, a website which has a $1,000 paywall to see its content, claimed PS5 may be using AMD Zen CPU and Navi GPU microarchitecture. VR support would be a priority, and a large amount of dev kits were already sent out, so much so that the author suggests a PS5 release date of 2018. This site has previously posted accurate reports for console hardware prior, so this was initially the most credible PS5 rumor at the time. Of course, the idea of the console launch in the same year the article was posted seemed laughable, and Jason Schreier, formerly of Kotaku, agreed. A few days later, he reached out to many developers, all of different disciplines, working at first and third-party studios, and many of them, even at Sony first-party studios, were not briefed at all about PS5. However, there were some individuals that were aware, indicating that if PS5 kits were out there, they were likely the first iteration where it resembles a standard PC tower, and that they would be restricted to only a handful of people at a studio. Schreier also notes that at GDC the month before, he was told any meetings developers had with Sony, the publisher was making vague hints at a 2020 timeframe. These early rumors are fascinating given the report was accurate about Sony continuing to work with AMD and going with their next generation microarchitecture. But the authors seem to be very off base about the release timeline, which could be due to a lack of understanding for the console hardware industry and game development, whereas more digging led to the revelation that some kits are probably out there, but a 2020 release is more what to expect. The Marcus Sellers tweet is a good example of what we commonly see today surrounding game rumors. It sounds reasonable with no easy way of immediately confirming or denying it. This might have just been very good timing on their end to appear right when it's not even 100% that any iteration of a dev kit is confirmed to be out there, and normally first party would receive them before third party. But anyway, as a good baseline, Sony has confirmed PS5 development began as early as fall of 2015, where the lead system architect Mark Cerny began asking developers what they want out of a next-generation console, much like they did with PS4. And this is rather early in the process, but this is a starting point to understand when Sony really kicked off PS5. Later in April, it was reported that one of Sony's principal programmers was working with AMD on their Ryzen technology, an easy association being that PS4 does not feature Ryzen tech, so this must be for PlayStation 5. This would coincide nicely with reports in June from WCCF Tech and Forbes about AMD building Navi primarily for PS5. It was actually noted that a large portion of staff were moved away from Vega to work on Navi for Sony, and that Navi was primarily for Sony. Essentially, this was AMD now focusing on their big customer accounts rather than their general parts business. Sony, Microsoft, and HP at the time accounted for nearly 44% of their revenue, and with PS4's current market lead, AMD would be motivated to divert staff to the Navi project for Sony. Of course, Microsoft would also be utilizing Navi, but this for the most part lines up with what we know today publicly. Cerny has gone out of his way to mention that if certain PS5 GPU features make their way to consumer parts, then this was a direct result of Sony and AMD's collaboration. Before 2018 ended, December had a notable pastebin entry from an alleged small-time developer in Europe. They claimed they were doing contract work for a AAA game slated for PS5's launch in 2020. They also say official PS5 info would be in a small reveal in the second quarter of 2019, which turned out to be true. Alongside that, they list off a number of additional claims. PS5's release would be in March or November, backwards compatible, PS Plus Premium. They list off specs that are fairly predictable for the time. 8K upscaling, PSVR in 2020, DualShock 5 having a camera inside for VR, the price $500. Launch games include Gran Turismo 7, PUBG, Last of Us 2, Ghost of Tsushima, also later games for Bad Company 3, Harry Potter, GTA 6 Holiday 2020 with 1 month exclusivity for PS5, Assassin's Creed Horizon 2 for 2021. This post is a great example of number 1, naming off enough things that some of it might actually stick, and number 2, demonstrating that no one person would have access to this much information from multiple studios. Now, you could argue they're a real developer, and word of mouth in their field has just jumbled up all of this gossip, but at that point, why bother? This is our one example here, because frankly, we had too much of this going on for PS5, be it Pastebin, Reset Era, Reddit, NeoGAF, 4chan. Basically, all these posts that rattle off a lot of information have been largely false, but we do have one example we'll touch on later. Going into 2019, we saw a tweet in January from notable AMD part leaker Tum_Apisak, which revealed a product code for AMD Gonzalo, which could potentially be for a next generation console. When breaking down the product code, it's implied it's for a dedicated games device rather than desktop or mobile, with a base CPU frequency of 1.6 GHz and a max of 3.2 GHz, 8 cores total. In April, we saw an update to the Gonzalo product code where previously the GPU frequency was 1 GHz, this shot up to 1.8 as the max frequency, and this was just before our first official announcement of Sony's next generation PlayStation. They weren't calling it PS5, but this was an exclusive story on Wired where they confirmed Sony would be going with AMD, using the company's new 7nm Zen 2 microarchitecture, and a custom variant of Navi for the GPU. This didn't confirm the Gonzalo leak, but it certainly did back it up. The same day of the Wired article, the author Peter Rubin followed up on Twitter with one quote he left out about the console's potential price tag, where Cerny says, "I believe that we will be able to release it at a suggested retail price that will be appealing to gamers in light of its advanced feature set. Keep this in mind later for when we get to price." The following months, we actually got more info directly from Sony. In May, the company confirmed there will be no PSVR 2 at launch, and we got a sneak peek at the Spider-Man SSD demo that was described in the Wired.com article. In June, Sony Group CEO Kenichiro Yoshida described PS5 as a niche product for hardcore gamers, and we also heard that the transition from PS4 to PS5 would be a smooth one. The big leak we saw, which wasn't very publicized for the time, was the Oberon leak pulled from GitHub on August 12th from another notable part leaker. Oberon was now believed to be an updated revision of Gonzalo, but this time there's 3 performance parameters that gives us more insight into possible PS5 silicon. The main reason? Gen 0 and Gen 1 are exact matches for PS4 and PS4 Pro specifications. These are backwards compatibility tests, telling us that Gen 2 is the PS5 spec, and that PS5 would handle backwards compatibility in the same manner as PS4 Pro. These are modes the consoles can fall back on for native compatibility in the event a boost setting disrupts the game. Knowing this, we can ascertain back in August 2019 that PS5 would have 36 compute units with 9.2 teraflops of GPU performance. At the time, and later in December, this was the hot topic surrounding the next-gen consoles, that coveted teraflop number. This leak was a number that most people did not want to hear, hoping that PS5 would be much higher, but it was important at the time to remember that there was very little context surrounding what was leaked information. Clock speeds could change, memory could change, there was no reference to GPU features, nothing. We'll cover more of this later, but for now, let's continue down the PS5 roadmap. August 20th, we saw patent images come out for what looked like a PS5 development kit, an extremely strange looking device with the designer being Yasuhiro Ittori. The very same day, a senior artist at Codemasters casually mentioned on Twitter, "It's a dev kit, we have some in the office." The tweet was quickly deleted. This, of course, was in fact the PS5 dev kit. We saw a real-life picture of it leak in late October from the YouTube channel Zone of Tech, and Gizmodo corroborated the authenticity, claiming they received images of it prior as well. They even mentioned the PS5 codename as Prospero, and this is from Shakespeare's The Tempest, which also has characters named Ariel and Gonzalo, both of which were previously used codenames for PS5 Silicon. We had even more pictures of the dev kit leak in November. This was all correct. In September, there was a rumor from Japanese journalist Enji Nishikawa where during a live stream he mentions casually the company is considering a PS5 Pro at launch, saying that consumers nowadays are familiar with multiple products on day one like iPhones. This of course turned out to be false, however we did end up getting 2 SKUs for PS5, with one of them being an all-digital console. Considering we had absolutely zero rumors regarding 2 SKUs or an all-digital one, perhaps this is the product of second or third-hand information getting misconstrued by the time it's said. October is when we get more confirmed info, with the console being officially named PlayStation 5, coming holiday 2020. It's here where Sony confirms many aspects of the console through another article with Wired.com. They talk about hardware-accelerated ray tracing, UI features, boot times, the controller's adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, and more. In December, Jason Schreier tweeted a few details he'd been hearing about next-gen, saying PS5 and the next Xbox specs were both similar and powerful, and PS5's strategy would be about accessibility, having almost no load times. We already had a good idea of this from the Wired articles where Sony mentions their SSD was faster than anything on the market, but this was indeed a larger principle of PS5 than, say, Microsoft's messaging for Series X. Early January, we saw Sony reveal the PS5 logo at CES 2020, which was, well, a very minor detail, but still nice to have. Normally we don't get any PlayStation news at CES, but this was where we started to see the tension build for PS5 news. Based off of the PS4's February event in 2013, everyone is now speculating we'll see the same for PS5 in February 2020. This did not happen. In fact, January 13th is when Sony confirmed they won't be at E3 again and will instead focus on attending hundreds of consumer-focused events. Not all too surprising, given they've skipped E3 before. The same day, though, we did have an interesting post show up on Pastebin, and this one reads as someone who was genuinely informed about PS5 ahead of confirmed specs and gameplay. They say, "First of all, PCs will have a hard time catching up with the new console due to the high storage speeds. And with high, I mean crazy high. This machine is disruptive. Here's how they're doing it. PCIe controllers add overhead. The console will go even further. The system storage memory chips, not going to tell you what they are soldered to the main board and are supervised by a custom controller that is part of a crazy custom I/O concept. Whoever designed this was a madman." They will say immediate a lot on stage, and they're right about that. I can't think of a single way to oversaturate this I/O in a game scenario unless you're a complete moron doing it on purpose. Gaming PCs will have a hard time because even if you go for a high-end PCIe 4 NVMe SSD, you will never get this storage speed because of software and system limitations. This was in January, and it is absolutely a very informed understanding of the custom controller in PS5. In a sea of misinformation, places like Pastebin and 4chan can still be a source of good info due to the anonymity of the platforms. Late January and early February, we had some photos leak of the PS5 dev kit's UI, and these look very similar to PS4, but they are still notably different. These were likely very early versions that are more dressed like the PS4 UI, and we know them to be genuine from patents Sony filed where the resemblance is prominent. Of course, the final interface ended up looking much different, but a lot of the basic groundwork and usability is needed before you get to launch, and that's what these were. By mid-February, we had a report from Bloomberg claiming PS5 parts were costly and that Sony was struggling with pricing PS5. One of the main culprits being the PS5's cooling system, which was noted as being unusually expensive. At the time, this wasn't all too surprising given the known PS5 specs were placing this console at a higher price tag, but thermals were always a concern for the console form factor. Hearing this was encouraging, and this was ultimately true. Not only did a patent show up in August 2020 referring to liquid metal, but this is in fact what PS5 uses instead of traditional thermal paste. The heatsink is also massive and has cooling performance similar to a vapor chamber. This is absolutely in the veins of exotic cooling and is surely more expensive than a standard fan, heatsink, and thermal paste. It's at this point where we need to understand where we are in time. February 2020 is when many people are expecting a PS5 event of some kind, but the impact of a novel coronavirus, COVID-19, is now making a large impact on a global scale. Behind the scenes, this has made a massive change in the games industry across the board. So from here on out, we have to keep in mind the PS5 news cycle has now moved away from traditional public events to online news only. And it stands to reason that while many were frustrated with Sony's delayed messaging on many aspects of the console, a lot of this easily falls back to just the logistics of launching new hardware during a global pandemic. With that said, March is when we got a live stream for what was a planned GDC talk called The Road to PS5. This wasn't really a consumer-focused show, but we did get a lot of technical insight into PS5, where we learned the console's exact specifications. We now knew PS5 would utilize a variable frequency for the CPU and GPU, capped at 3.5 and 2.23 GHz respectively. At 36 CUs, this puts PS5's GPU performance at 10.3 teraflops, essentially adding more validity to the original GitHub leak, but also proving why context is so important. The original leak put PS5 at 9.2 teraflops, and considering the SoC needs to be tested and validated well in advance of launch, this was indeed near final PS5 silicon being tested. What we couldn't see back then was Sony's extremely high frequency. We also had no idea it would be a variable frequency tied to a set power budget, operating in what can only be best described as reverse boost clocks, where PS5 will mostly operate at peak performance all the time and have occasional dips on taxing situations. This, alongside the thermal dissipation, is Sony's commitment to a properly cooled and quiet next-generation console. Looking back, we had a number of rumors from different sites and sources claiming the teraflop number was higher, but at the end of the day, these were all wild claims with no solid foundation. Even GitHub lacked the necessary context, proving no one knew anything about the console's final performance. Now, again, perhaps people really did hear things in the development community from working on dev kits, but those will all have wildly different numbers versus what's going to ship at retail. Of course, people want to get involved in the console wars and feeling their console choice is better than the other, but now that we've got gameplay from both PS5 and Series X, and seeing excellent results on each of them, we can put less weight into the teraflop number and more into a discussion of the actual software. Next up, in April, we saw a PlayStation blog post revealing the new PS5 controller called the DualSense. It's a dramatic departure from prior DualShocks and has all the bells and whistles Sony noted during the second Wired article. It has adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, USB-C, a new create button, larger battery, a microphone, and a two-tone finish with white being the dominant color. Up to this point, we've seen a controller patent and a different looking DualShock in the dev kit leaks, but this didn't really reveal anything. The DualSense was kept completely secret. Later on, we did start to see the DualSense itself leak, but the initial reveal was good. May 13th, we saw the Unreal Engine 5 demonstration, and this was great as it was one of our first real visual announcements showing us what the engine, PS5, and an SSD can really do. But this is where we still have mounting pressure from fans wondering when an actual PS5 event would show up to show us game announcements and the console itself. This would finally come June 11th, the Future of Gaming event. Here we got game announcements, a UI tease, console designs, and accessories. For games, some were expected and some weren't. We had mounting rumors on too many occasions to list off about Demon's Souls, Gran Turismo 7, a sequel to Horizon, and another Ratchet & Clank. But there were still surprises in Spider-Man Miles Morales, Returnal, Sackboy Big Adventure, and Destruction All-Stars. The console design, like the DualSense, was held in good secrecy. Alongside the digital edition, nothing got out, and we had plenty of fake images and mock-ups floating around prior. Interestingly, one user on Reset Era did correctly rattle off all the announcements alongside things that didn't show up at the event but confirmed separately. At times, we do have credible info that comes forward, but it's very rare we have a post like this that knows of multiple announcements and are willing to give it up without being too vague or cautious about what they know. Later in June, we had a picture of the console being held at the production facility, which was genuine, alongside comments on LinkedIn from the UX designer at PlayStation, Matt McLaurin, mentioning the console would be customizable in ways we've never seen before. This lines up nicely with a leak we had in July of the PS5's upper and lower shells in the production facility, leading many to think that these would be user replaceable based off of Matt's comments, and the shells looking like they just have simple tabs on them. This turned out to be true. During the PS5 teardown, the top and bottom shell can be easily pulled off without voiding the warranty, and we're already seeing companies spring up offering different color options. Also in July, we had a rumor on Twitter from Roberto Serrano claiming PS5's release date, price, and pre-order would be coming July 13th. All of this info was left out of the last PS5 event, which for it being around the E3 timeframe is where we normally expect this. July 13th came and went, this was false. And funnily enough, this rumor did manage to reach Sony. Jeff Keighley did a hands-on video with the DualSense on July 17th and talked with Sony's head of global marketing, Eric Lempel. Eric acknowledged the rumor, saying he doesn't know how it started, but the company would not drop pre-orders at a moment's notice. And even more hilariously, this is exactly what happened after we got the price and release date in September. Retailers opened up pre-orders day of, rather than the next day, frustrating everyone based off of Sony's initial promise. But let's stop for a second and take note of where we are now. Prior to the September event, fans are getting tired of waiting for PS5 news. For the last year, many rumors and speculation kept pointing us towards dates and months where Sony would discuss PS5, and none of it happened. GamesBeat reporter Jeffrey Grubb was quite accurate with most of the planned summer events and Sony's, but practically everything else was almost always an ambiguous soon. When it comes to price and release, this is where an ongoing narrative started that Sony and Microsoft were waiting to see who would go first. Microsoft had made comments about being agile on price, and Sony mentioned during an earnings call that it's a competing space, so they can't discuss price either. But at the end of the day, there's no indication that these companies were in an actual standoff, and COVID still played a massive role in how the news was presented to consumers. Once price and details were released from both Sony and Microsoft, Sony admitted PS5 pricing was decided at the start of the year, with the goal of having one console at a $399 price point, and Microsoft was able to reach $299 with the lower spec Series S. Predictably, and without much fanfare, the regular PS5 and Series X matched at $500. And considering this was rather predictable, we can comfortably say that most rumors regarding price were false. This was never a matter of, say, $15,600 versus $17,300. No, the range of pricing is small. We knew these consoles would be expensive to build, we've got prior generations to reference. Anyone claiming they knew pricing and providing proof simply had good odds of being right. If you add in the complexity of the release date, all of a sudden, no one's right. Either way, our last missing piece is the PS5's UI. By mid-September, all we had were 2 leaked images and a tease from Sony. Well, come early October, there was a leak of the boot-up screen and some pictures of different parts of the UI, and this was alarming to some based off of the available SSD storage, but many seem to forget the PS5's custom SSD is 825GB total before the OS reserves come in, so this really should have been an expectation. But it wouldn't take too long for these leaks to be confirmed. Between the teardown video and the official UI presentation in mid-October, we were able to corroborate the authenticity of the UI leaks. And that brings us to today. PlayStation 5 is no longer a mystery to us. We know the console, we know the lineup of games, pricing, we've seen the UI, we've finally got it all. And if it wasn't obvious, rumors and leaks can often have a very poor track record, but the most unlikely of places can be where we get the real deal. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As I mentioned in the intro, we did do these topics for PS3 and PS4 as well, and so I'm going to link those videos down below in the description, just in case you want to go check those out. They do easily get lost in all the channel uploads, but same deal there like we did here. All the rumors and speculation building up to PS3 and PS4. Really interesting to see how it was for those two consoles versus PS5, but there are some obvious similarities. If you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.